and a very significant animal nutritionist that participates in the food sector, more specifically in her role as animal nutritionist for the Jamaica Broilers Group of Company, and more specifically for iPro Feeds. She's a trained individual that has many years of service and has been willing to participate in this and many other such events. And without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Tanika O'Connor Denny. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. It's truly a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for your introduction. It's always a pleasure working with you in the UEFA capacity and, of course, on our national committee. I want to welcome everyone to what promises to be an information-packed seminar on the role that climate change plays in layer productivity. And this is a timely topic, and I really appreciate the United Agriculturalists and Farmers Association of Jamaica for bringing this to the fore. We all know the facts. Climate change has been linked to everything from rising sea levels, wild fluctuation in rainfall patterns, the Sargasso seaweed affecting our shores throughout the Caribbean. But how does it affect us on a personal level, particularly as farmers and livestock farmers in this instance? Well, joining us today to discuss the real life impact on climate change on livestock productivity and layer production and efficiency is Mr. Cicero Lalu and Mr. Donald Parma. They'll be exploring the impact of climate change on layer production in a real quantitative way. According to the WHO, food security can only be achieved when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active lifestyle. And animal-based proteins can fill a multitude of micronutrient gaps at a lower volume of intake, with eggs being one of the cheapest sources of readily digestible protein. Eggs are excellent superfoods packed with 6 grams of protein, 78 calories, and an excellent source of vitamin D, which we know is linked to inflammation, bone health, and the immune system, and choline, which helps in immune function as well as fetal brain development. The quantity and quality of the eggs produced by a layer bird is dependent upon several factors, which include the strain of the birds, stocking density, the quantity and quality of the feed consumed, and most importantly, the microclimate under which they survive. So today we'll be exploring one of the factors that's affecting egg production here in the Caribbean: climate change, and how it impacts the microclimate within the house. So first, we'll discuss introduction to layer production. In this production, we'll give a brief overview of feeding management of layer type birds. And then we'll move into the impact of climate change on egg production. And in this presentation, Mr. Lalu will be discussing research findings gathered here in the Caribbean that's relevant to us on how heat stress impacts the layer production and what are the mitigating steps we can take as farmers to reduce the impact. And then finally, we'll be estimating the best operating conditions for layer production, the effects on feed consumption, age, the humidity, the stocking density of egg production, and this will be presented by Mr. Donald Parma. So let me introduce my good friend, a mentor, the first presenter today, Mr. Cicero Lalu. He's a retired Jamaican animal nutritionist, hails from Charlestown, Portland. He attended Excelsior High School and later University of West Indies, St. Augustine. He has a Master of Science degree in Animal Science from the Faculty of Agriculture, UA West Indies in Trinidad. And his professional career began at the Sugarcane Feed Center in Trinidad, and then he later became a lecturer in animal science at the University of West Indies, Trinidad. During his impressive 25 years there, he successfully supervised 2 candidates that went on to be awarded Doctor of Philosophy in livestock science, 2 candidates that were awarded Master of Philosophy in livestock science, 12 candidates that were awarded Master of Science in livestock science, and over 100 candidates awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture with a specialization in livestock science. He has authored many chapters in textbooks, as well as over 60, I repeat, 60 peer-reviewed, internationally published articles, which is extremely impressive. I know that, you know, he graciously allowed my name to be added to one of his articles, and you know, I really appreciate that and the guidance he often gives when it comes to writing. Among the things that he's interested in is byproducts used in animal feed, high-value protein forages in ruminant and non-ruminant diets, and applying economic and statistical theories to understanding the decision-making process that livestock farmers need to make. And recently, he has been really focusing on heat stress and the impact it has on livestock production. And I must commend him for championing this cause. I know when I met him over 12 years ago, he spoke to me about it. He was the first one that introduced me to the FLAIR camera, and in fact, piqued my own interest in the impact of heat stress on livestock production. So without further ado, I'll hand over today's webinar to Mr. Cicero Lalu.
So you're connecting up Mr. Lalu. In the meanwhile, I just want to, acknowledge the presence of Mr. Fitzgerald Reed, the Director of Special Project and Climate Change. Through his office in UAFO, we are able to present this webinar on the impact of climate change and animal production. Welcome, Mr. Fitzgerald Reed.
Yes, thank you, Donald. Welcome to all. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and we wait with bated breath for the information anticipated, and hope that all goes well. Thanks all for your participation.
Well, thanks, Mr. Reed. And I want to tell Mr. Lalu that you are the one who recommend him, right? Mr. Lalu, Fitzgerald is one of your student, you know. I don't remember him, but Fitzgerald is one of your student.
I remember him,
he said, C.H.O. Lalu.
Yes, I remember him, man. He did several labs and yeah, very good time, and yeah, a matter, you know, in his own right.
Matter God.
Yeah.
You all seen my screen?
No, we're not seeing your screen as yet.
Oh, trying to find the share.
All right, down at the very bottom, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about the 6th one at the very bottom.
Yeah, well, somehow this thing is not coming up on my let me see. seem to be having a little bit of problem because I'm not seeing this not coming up on the bottom of the screen, which it normally do.
Oh, maybe if you change your view to speaker, it might show up.
Did that? I'm not seeing that.
Do you want to send me a copy of the presentation and then I can share it instead for you?
Okay.
I sent you my email address.
Okay. I now see the share screen come up.
It's not coming up?
Yeah, now come up. You see me now?
Yes, we're seeing you now. We're good to go.
Okay, good. One error here is that it's not the correct presentation. This is the second presentation. Get back out of this here and show. Gosh, come on now. Are you seeing the screen?
Yes, we're seeing your screen, but it's still the old presentation or your second presentation.
Okay, you seeing it now?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, good. So we'll start
wait, Lalu, do you want to move to full presentation view?
Okay, yeah, you got it now?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Yes. So what we want to do is just to quickly to understand and to describe feeding management at egg type pullet to point of lay, to list the major factor affecting pullet development, and to list why farm records and analysis are important to the pullet producer. Now, I know that we are talking about pullet production and development, and it would be as it pertains to Jamaica, but I have more or less taken a generic view, which basically would apply to the industry. Now, one thing we know is that we are dealing with new strains of layers, and I believe in Jamaica that the main layer strain, and I stand corrected, is the Novagen Brown. And these animals basically most of these are early maturing layers, and they create new demands and require a shift from the older strain to how we feed and manage these new strains, so that the success of table egg enterprise therefore depends very large extent on the quality of the pullet that you house in the layer house. Now, a quality pullet would be defined as one of optimum body weight and condition that is required for performance in the laying house. And the major factors that we are considering here are nutrition and feeding, which would impact on body weight and uniformity. And of course, the health status of the bird, which has to do with your vaccination program, how you debeak, and so on. And of course, have a very big impact of housing and your microclimate, which they would deal with the climate in the house, and also your light and lighting. And of course, there's the economical aspect of it, which of course, Mr. Palmer would deal with some of that, so you could get an idea of that. And of course, there's genetics and the breeds that we are dealing with. Now, there are some critical period for pullet development, and the first 6 weeks, which is considered the starter period, where you have growth, which feed consumption, energy requirement, and of course we have the protein or amino acid requirement, and of course there's mineral and vitamin requirement. Then there's the growth period, which takes place from 70 to 20 weeks, which is significant because most of your new strain of broiler will start to lay before the 20 weeks period. Now, when it comes to the feeding program, many different programs are available that work, but may depend on climatic and management condition. While most supplier company has a booklet which basically give you outline in management, only in recent times you start to see information on the hot climate management of some of these strains. But the key objective is to, in developing the bird, growing that during this stage, is that you want to develop a strong skeletal system. There must be good lean muscle mass and sufficient reserve for peak and sustained production by the bird. Now, and as such, you'll find out of these these manuals that the different breeds have different growth patterns. And so the key to feeding your egg type pullet, while there are several factors of importance to pullet development, the major role really is in 2 parts, and each part is extremely important to the success of producing a quality pullet for the laying house, so that each group of egg type pullet must reach sexual maturity at the correct weight for that particular strain, and at an age that is optimum to produce egg economically during her laying years. Sorry. So that's very important and the key factor in our feeding and nutrition of the layer pullet. Now, there are some, one of the key nutrient is your energy requirement, and the 0 to 6 weeks is a very, the starter stage is a very critical and crucial physiological stage for your pullet, because the chick require a well-balanced high-density diet. However, since we are in a hot weather condition, the optimum pullet growth sometimes cannot be achieved with low energy diet, and as such, the nutritionist will have to design high energy diets that could meet the needs. And some of these diets may contain fat that would assist in maintaining energy levels. Then there's the protein requirement. Now, normally we talk about protein, but quality protein is defined as the proper balance of amino acid, which is the key to proper feed formulation and will affect the level of crude protein in the diet. So poultry rations are largely consisting or based on corn and soy. Thus, certain amino acids are likely to be deficient. Methionine is generally the most limited amino acid in poultry. In poultry, this early development, the first 6 to 8 weeks are most important. High energy and high protein diet for starter, or in some cases, you may use a pre-starter diet, which is basically a very high energy diet. And so for you to get enough protein, you may find that you will also need a fairly high crude protein in that diet, so that you could maintain the energy to protein ratio. Of course, minerals, quality and quantity are critical for skeletal development in the bird at this stage, and these must be taken into consideration. Now, when we look at that first 6 weeks, the startup period, and the growth during the 6 weeks, there are some characteristics that we note. That this is where you get the most rapid gains are made at this stage based on the percent increase in body weight. Birds are also most efficient at converting feed consumed at this stage. So weekly feed consumption will vary, largely due to the strain that is used, the energy content of the ration, and of course, most importantly, the ambient condition or the microclimate in the house, the chick size, and the quality of the chicks that have been laid down, and of course, your feed form are also very important and must be taken into consideration. Now, largely, a lot of these are actually met by the feed millers who, of course, formulate feed for different physiological state in the pullet development. Now, we normally refer to what we might call the phase feeding when we rear in the pre-laying stage. the pullet development stage, where we expect that we would have a number of diets that would vary in the energy and the protein content, and also in the mineral. One particular mineral, of course, is calcium, and the calcium to phosphorus ratio that is critical to develop the skeletal system, and also to be able to have the reserve that the bird will need during the laying period. So we have a starter diet, a grower, a developer, a pre-lay ration, and the pre-lay ration is very critical, and then we move into the layer. And we have a number of different layers that we would use. Like you may talk about this layer 1, layer 2, or layer 3. Well, the more critical is the layer starter at the development of lay. And this is very, very critical, as it coincides with your basic body development that will be taking place. Critically is the fat growth, that you do not want the layer to develop a heavy fat growth, as this can have impact on the future production when in terms of laying. Then, of course, you look at the development, which is very critical, of the reproductive tract of the bird that will facilitate and maintain proper egg production. Now, one of the critical things in feeding the pullet within our system is being able to ensure that you get proper weight for age in the bird. Now, your starter diet critically should have your bird with the correct weight at, say, 6 weeks. At this stage, we can then switch onto the grower diet. However, if you want to be able to produce a pullet that will maintain proper production, if, as you monitor and you log this against the manufacturer's recommendation for weight for age, if your bird doesn't reach the correct weight at 6 weeks, then it is possible for what you want to do is to maintain the feed in your starter diet till that weight is reached. And basically, you should reach that weight by about 8 weeks. Anyway, if you have to feed starter diet beyond 8 weeks, then of course you're at this stage it would be later than that, 10 weeks or anywhere up to 12 weeks. It would be uneconomical for you to do so. So that is why it is very critical in terms of your management and feeding of the pullet. Now, in terms of your developer diet, when you feed it, feeding, you know, there are variations that you will have from strain to strain, depending on the commercial strain that you are using. And of course, there will be some guidance in your manual, which, of course, you will consult. Some breed may recommend increasing energy level, so you may get weights. And of course, some may, you may not, you, of course, as a farmer with your years of experience, you would sometimes more or less rely on your knowledge to handle these issues. Or critically, during the developer stage, you must watch for development of fat in the abdomen, right? At this stage also, you need to watch the pullet calcium and phosphorus level to prevent gout development. Also, it is critical at this stage for as the physiological state for the bird to be able to start laying down calcium in the medullary bones and so on, to be able to use during the egg laying period. The growth period between 7 to 18 weeks, your energy intake is the main nutrient controlling the body weight and growth during this period. The amount of energy normally in the growing ration would be from about 2750 to 2900 kilocalories ME per kilogram. That's the level of energy in the diet, or the energy concentration. But however, you may find that these levels that are sometimes recommended in the manuals, when suggestions are made as to these diets, these levels may not be optimum under our hot weather condition, because birds may not be able to eat enough feed, and body weight targets will not be met. And depending on how distribution of climate of the temperature within the house, because you may have what you may call some area, some hot spots and so on in your house, and if it's not properly ventilated, then you will have some uniformity problem as to how the birds grow, which will again impact on the production. If we just if we just give an idea from your NRC nutrient requirement on poultry 1994, there are some recommendation for the protein and amino acid for growing pullets, right? So you will see the difference between the two major strains, which is your white egg layers and your brown egg layers. So you will see those different things in terms of your protein. We're looking at about a 16% crude protein diet between 6 to 12 weeks, and then you drop at 12 to 18 weeks to about 15%, right? And then you'll see the various amino acids that we're looking at during this period, and you will see you get some drop as you move from 6 to 12 weeks to 12 to 18 weeks in like your lysine, methionine, and of course you have methionine plus cysteine, which are your sulfur-based amino acids. And then there's tryptophan, right? These you will see that there are some shifting there in your white egg. And also you will see that there are some differences in terms of the brown egg layers, in that the requirement for these amino acids tend to be less in the brown egg layer. One of the issues for that is because your brown egg layer tend to consume more feed than your white egg layers. When we look at in terms of amino acids, we talk about an ideal, the ideal protein concept, where we look at the ideal distribution of amino acid in the diet, in that you have the non-essential to the essential amino acids, and they're being in the correct ratio in the diet to improve the pullet performance. Of course, once you may go out of balance with these, then you have issues in meeting the bird's requirement for amino acids. And so you will see these are out of whack and will create problem in your feeding and development of your pullet. Now, one of the critical aspects during this stage is having a good body weight and uniformity, because this is critical for good laying performance of your birds. And so the technology now in most of the sophisticated housing system with your computer control is you actually have a scale that is set up in your house that will automatically weigh bird every day, and with the computer program it will calculate the uniformity within that house. So the good uniformity is essential for this. So you take the individual body weight. Of course, you monitor and feed intake, so you have an idea of the uniformity. And the best uniformity you're looking at, your uniformity should be more than 80%. Once you end up less than this, you're going to have significant problem later on. There are a number of factors that will affect development, and we've been talking about some of the aspects of feeding, which are important. Then there's genetics, the strain that you're using. Now, another aspect of this is you call the season of hatch. Largely, the farmer do not have control over this, which is really your pullet producers that this factor would have an impact. And of course, this would have an impact on the farm. Your light stimulation program or your lighting program are very critical, and different strain require different light stimulation, particular in the early stage of growth. A very big issue is stress on your birds, and a lot of stress during the pullet stage are actually man-made and caused by certain management condition that you may need to carry out. For example, during the vaccination program, during beak trimming period, and so on. Of course, your management practices are very critical in affecting those birds' development, such as your stocking density and so on. Of course, your feeding management is very critical. For example, in our hot weather climate, you may wish to look to feed during the cooler part of the day rather than when it's very hot. Or you may have with your particular management system where if the time gets very hot, there are systems that will raise the feeders away from the pullet and will only lower them so the feed become available to them when it's in the cooler part of the day. Now, this this graph just gives you an idea of two different flocks. Flock A, which is one with even uniform growth, and then the second one is a flock which is uneven or below the uniformity level of 80%. And you could see what is happening in terms of egg production. Now, one of the things also, although you're seeing the birds might look to peak somewhere over 90%, what will happen with these birds is that you will get a rapid drop in production. And most time, these birds in practice will cease to lay earlier than those that have been with the correct or uniformity over 80%. So these are very critical to the farmer's income, and maintaining the persistency in lay is very critical to that. When we look at the genetics, well, we know size and weight of the strain at sexual maturity, very critical. They were, for example, if you're dealing with the white layers, their body weight at maturity will be less than your brown egg layers, so that they will be recommended weight for the different strain in which you want them to be able to mature at their optimal weight, so that you will have to manage your feeding strategy during the growing phase, so that the bird can reach their required weight and body condition at the point of lay, which is one of the first critical things you want to do with your birds, to be able to have a successful production period during the laying phase. And so that, you know, as I always tell some of my students, that way the farmers could jingle some money to the bank. So you have different birds are bred for different housing system. One of the critical thing for layers is compared to, say, broilers, is that you need to have these birds have been bred to be more docile in their behavior and less aggressive, which of course result in less divergent behavior such as cannibalism and so on. Now, just for a moment, let's take a look at some of the specification from different breeder companies. And here we're looking at the white egg and the brown eggs, right? These breeder companies. And this has been some performance data from these breeder company. It might be a little bit dated because this data was relevant to, say, in 1997, somewhere around there. But the performance parameter is to give you an example of the differences between the strains, right? So, and some of the critical parameters that you look at when evaluating your production from the various layer strain. One critical aspect is that you look at the age at 50% lay, and you will see basically as you look through these, you have some small variation and some variation within the different breeder companies when you look at the white egg layer strain. Similar, when you look at the brown egg, you will see some small differences, but what you will observe basically, there's not a very significant difference between those strains in each category. Then you look at peak at percent of egg laying, and then you will see that most of these are just slightly over 90% that you will see. So, similar, when you look at the brown egg, you will see that they're all around the same. So there's not much difference between these breeder company. Then when we look at the hen day production to termination stage, you will see also that same characteristic in terms of your hen day production, right? The egg weight, similarly, you will see to 30 weeks, you will see the egg weights are quite similar. Of course, your brown egg layer tend to produce slightly larger eggs than your brown eggs. And the egg weights, you will see a similar thing. But a critical thing when we look at these is your body weight at 18 weeks. You will see that in the white eggs, largely because these strain, similar strain have been used in developing these you will see that they're not much different. But the body weight in the brown egg layers are much larger, right? I know, these birds are basically over 2 kilograms, slightly over 2 kilograms. I know that, and they in Trinidad make a significant part of their market, because what the layer farmers do, they would sell what they call spenten, which are of course over 2 kilograms, and this would largely go into what we call the roti market. That give us some of the specification for your commercial layers. Now there's some performance between your brown egg and your white egg, and what you will see is that, remember that these are a bit dated, because now I believe your brown egg layers are basically giving you up to 300 eggs during the laying cycle. But, and the eggs are slightly higher. But the critical thing, and you'll see the average weight at 18 weeks, but a significant thing that you want to look at is your feed cost at the end of lay, for the lay period, which in your brown egg layer, it's slightly more because these birds will eat more. There's no difference in the cost of the feed, right? But the egg value per dozen is higher in your brown eggs than your white eggs, because of course the size. And your egg value, as you will see, you get a slightly higher income from your egg, and the cost for feed, of course, again, is higher in your brown eggs compared to your white eggs. Now, one critical factor that one will have to consider is your lighting program. And your optimum growing day length depends on many factors. You breed, the type of housing, whether you have a open-sided, naturally ventilated housing, or you have a totally light control housing. For example, I know tunnel ventilation type system are largely used for broilers, but if you're using one of those type of housing, you have total light control. Now, the time of the year is also of significance. And I know we have a greater change in time of the years, like in temperate, but we in the tropics also has different lighting for time of the year between, well, the summer months, if you equate it to the temperate, and what we might call around Christmas time, which will be the winter months in North America and those places. Now, the location of the farm is also critical. I know that in Jamaica, you may have farms out in Portland, and you may have farms down in Montego Bay, in that other end of the island, so that I am almost positive there must be a slight change in lighting program between those locations. The excise demands of the producer, whether you want to produce a great amount of large excavations.
Yeah, if I did. Yeah, I was asked.
The past history of attaining body weight on the pullet, all these are part of the experience of the farmer. Now, one of the critical things is being able to do your light stimulation. So it's important to have a light control program so you may control the age at sexual maturity. Now, I know that as a management practice, some producer may look to use feed control restriction. But this is actually not a very good practice. Being able to use this restriction to delay the onset of egg production. And the effect will be more pronounced with flock raised in open-sided house during the day of increase in day length. Now, generally, in terms of when the bird has just been placed during the starter phase, you would normally apply a 22 to 23 hours light period for at least the first 2 or 3 days. Now, the reason for this is to give the birds time to eat and find feed and water and so on. And generally, the day length would be reduced weekly after that until a constant day length for growth is reached. And this would be a general, part of your lighting program. What we have to remember is the shorter the day length that the birds can be grown on, the more control the farmers would have over the onset of production. And most of the recommendation for growing flocks are about 10 to 12 hours. Constant day length for growing help the bird recognize the stimulation and therefore respond to day length increase when given. Now, one of the issues have been, what type of lighting do we use in the thing? Now, there are two main type of light source that are available that would be used. One of these is the incandescent, the ordinary light bulb versus your fluorescent bulb. Now, in terms of your incandescent light, they are dimmer that you could use, and they are cheap and effective. Now, the thing is that you cannot do this with the fluorescent light, but the fluorescent bulbs use less power. The incandescent bulb could be, we could consider fairly cheap, although I don't know with the rising price due to COVID and so on, what that situation is right now. Also that they burn out much sooner or faster than your fluorescents. On a personal point of view and note, I tend to prefer incandescent bulb as they're more flexible, more easily dim, and the light is less harsh on the chick's eyes. Now, when we look at the stress in the bird, this is one of the activities that, as I said, was man-made and also cause stress on your bird. And actually, if these activities are not done right, then you could seriously damage your flock. And of course, during the period of stress, one of the critical things is that the bird consumption tend to vary, and it, of course, feed intake decrease, which impacts seriously on the flock uniformity. And some of these stressors include your beak trimming, vaccination, and just the general handling. Beak trimming, one of those, and of course, the animal welfare issue over this, and the breeders have tried to breed for birds that are less aggressive. And of course, this can be one of the most complicated service done to a flock. I know that in Jamaica, you generally have group of people that are very expert in doing this, and they may go from farm to farm in doing this activity. And again, that's not without its shortcoming, because as you move from farm to farm, you could actually spread disease. And if this is not done properly, then you could actually ruin that flock. Critically, this combined with high stocking density will create havoc in your flock. Well, generally, you beak trim at about 7 to 10 days, but critically, you need to be able to do some things like add vitamin K to the water for 2 days before you trim, and at least 2 days post trimming. You need to be able to increase the depth of the feed in the feeders, and of course decrease the water pressure on your waterers. Now, most of our beak trimming is done using the debeaking machine, and the blade temperature are important in this aspect and should be monitored. Because if the blade is too hot, it causes a condition we call bubble beaks, and so it takes a longer time and may have failure in the healing of the beak. Now, a very critical aspect is the control and prevention of infectious disease in our flock. Basically, there are some, in terms of their hygiene and so on, we must practice proper biosecurity measures, isolation of those birds on the farm from the other things. So you must have proper fencing and so on, and how the moving from young birds to older birds and so on. The management, of course, which would involve a health check and blood testing. I know that, for example, in some areas, a lot of blood testing may not be done because of inadequate facilities to be able to do this. What we want to do, of course, is to eradicate vertically transmitted disease, and you have those that are horizontally transmitted. Now, a key avenue of control is your vaccination programs. And in terms of vaccines, there are live vaccine and what we call inactivated vaccine that are used. Now, in terms of the vaccine use, basically, it's largely preventative because, prevention, as we say, is better than cure. And then, of course, if you have issues, there may be the curative issues. Now, one advice or warning is that one should not use vaccination programs that you see in manuals and so on. The vaccination program for local condition should be developed by the competent authority and should not be something that you get out of a management guide. Ask your local veterinarians and other producers to see what diseases are likely to be present in your area, because your competent authority and veterinarian would be much more aware of this than your producer manual. In general, all pullets are vaccinated for some of the following disease: Marek disease, Newcastle disease, infectious bronchitis disease, infectious brucell disease, and avian encephalomyelitis. And I just want to give you an idea of Trinidad. A couple of years ago in Trinidad, there was a farmer who actually brought in the avian encephalomyelitis vaccine and vaccinated his flock. And lo and behold, the whole flock came down with that disease, and the poultry surveillance unit and the Ministry of Agriculture all had to scramble to carry out eradication program from and destroy that flock of birds. And of course, later on, the farmer tried to sue the government. Now, a very critical thing in the tropics is supplying water, and water consumption in your growing pullet varies with a number of factors. The age, the breed or strain, the ambient temperature is probably the most important factor. Humidity, the density of the feed that is fed, and of course there are other nutritional factors that are involved in this. The quality of the water in terms of minerals that may in the water is also one of those factors. Now, if we look at water consumption, this is for your white pullet, your leghorn growing pullets, and this, of course, in a tropical condition. Down here, 1995, we did some work on this, looking at different temperatures and the pattern of water consumption. And you will see that at the higher temperature, 38 degrees Celsius, that you will have much higher thing. In many instances, our farms, our birds may be operating somewhere within these areas. So you're looking at water consumption somewhere around here. Yeah. And this is very critical. I remember 2 years ago, I was in Jamaica, and along with my friend Dr. Rankin, we were doing something with the RADA in looking at some of the climate impact on farmers in 2 different parishes, St. Thomas and in St. Mary. And in St. Thomas, we look at temperature difference in some of the layer strains. And one of the things we noted is that in St. Thomas, where one of the farmers had experienced some severe heat stress condition, they lost something over 40,000 Jamaican dollars in probably a 3-month period from heat stress. And the thing is, what was so amazing is that the roof of those pens did not have any insulating material. And the temperature of some of those galvanized was somewhere in the vicinity of 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. Now, so water temperature is critical. If the water temperature is too cold, this can lead to what we may call paste event in the birds. If the vitamin and electrolyte with a sugar-based carrier, this can also lead to similar condition, pasting, and also you may have some dehydration issue. One of the critical things with these birds is being able to ensure they are by triggering the water to ensure that chicks know where the water is. This just gives you some idea of your mineral requirement, and you will see between the brown egg and white egg layer, and you'll see in some instance in here that the in those starter days 0 to 42 days that the calcium level in both of course are here. Of course, when we get to the pre-lay diet and so on, your calcium and phosphorus level will go up. And you'll see your level for sodium, potassium, magnesium, iron, and copper, and zinc, and selenium. Then there's a vitamin requirement. We look at, you will see that there are some slight differences between the two strains. Vitamin K, which is very critical to apply when during the deep peak, which has to do with your bleeding, minimizing that. And again, these are general from the NRC nutrient requirement that was published in 1994. Now, just to give some key tips to feeding and part of your feeding management is that you need to weigh your pullet frequently, starting as early as 4 weeks of age. You need to watch your flock uniformity, and it's very important in obtaining optimum performance and profitability during the laying stage. And remember that normally starter is fed up to 6 weeks of age, and the change would normally take place from grower during the 6 to 7 weeks, particularly where the bird might be slightly underweight. Now, the body weight, as you monitor you want to plot a chart so that you're able to look at the change in your body weight compared to the recommended weight of the breeder company. As I mentioned earlier, you do not want to feed your starter beyond 8 weeks. As if you feed beyond the 10th week, then your production would become unprofitable. One critical thing that we have to look at under our condition and tropical feed is being able to store that feed in a dry and proper place to avoid mold growth in your feed because of the production of aflatoxins, which are very, very, very critical to the birds and will cause certain problem in your birds when you have aflatoxin poisoning in your bird. Now, one of the things is feed restriction is not recommended largely because it impacts negatively on flock uniformity. so that your body weight of your pullet during the 7 to 18 weeks should not vary much from your recommended breeder's body weight that, of course, as competent farmers, you would be monitoring. Now, this is, of course, your sort of standard suggested feeding program, generally, where your starter would be, of course, about 18 to 19% crude protein. In the tropics, we may be a little bit higher. We may go up to 20%. And your energy level, of course, under our condition, we may have slightly higher energy levels in the diet to ensure we get a proper DOL growth to the target body weight that we're looking at. And then, of course, we'd be reducing our protein content in the grower diet. Of course, part of this is to ensure that you feed at an economical rate. So you have your target body weight that you would reach, which most likely would be from your breeder company to your mature body size. And then, of course, your pre-lay ration, normally about 16 to 18% crude protein. You may get similar energy level as your starter stage in your bird, or it might be slightly higher. Now, critically at this stage also is the calcium level that you have to look for, because at this stage, with hormonal changes taking place, the birds will start to lay down calcium and phosphorus in the medullary bone and so on, and to ensue for the laying stage. So you get basically you want to get your eggs somewhere around the 18 weeks, because these birds these days you start much earlier, somewhere around 16 weeks or so. So you now different housing are used in your in different system, but largely bigger farmers and the most sophisticated farmers in the region tend to use what we call the cage laying system. Now this system is you generally have much more birds, so you have a higher stocking density. You could keep these housing much cleaner, but of course we could run into some uniformity in terms of the distribution of light and heat in this housing, and so having proper ventilation is very critical in this type of system. Now you may have what we call Havery system or some flow array system in the region, and generally this system sometimes tend to produce more flow eggs. You get much more dirty egg. You can have some cannibalism problem and so on. And then of course one system that we've seen, like I've seen in Trinidad, where there are a number of farmers pushing what free range or organic type farming system. Of course, on the market, you will see yard fowl being sold, yard fowl egg, right? And this is this has its issues with disease problem, sometimes biosecurity issue, cannibal issue, and so on. Salmonella is one of the bigger problems that you may find sometime in the poultry industry, both for layers and also for broilers. I know a couple of years ago we had a serious problem where in our asylum, or for want of a better colloquial slang, the madhouse. During the Christmas time, they made a batch of eggnog, which of course you know is you use raw eggs inside of that, and they may have left it for a period of time before serving that to the inmates, and they actually, quite a number of individuals came down with salmonella poisoning. You know, so we can have issues with disease. Now, in terms of the microclimate, there are some critical issues that we need to be able to monitor, to maintain properly, and that is you may have your inside microclimate for layers. We may maintain somewhere between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, and of course relative humidity somewhere between 60 to 80%. Of course, you want to keep that relative humidity somewhere at the 60% levels, because when we move to higher, 80%, we may actually run into issue with aflatoxin and some mold growth. The airspeed at the bird level should be about 0.2 meters per second, and at the inlet you want to have probably around 2 meters per second. Now, a critical thing that we have to be very cognizant of, especially in our deep litter type system, is the level of ammonia, which should not be more than 25% part per million that we have to. And there are ammonia meters which we can purchase online that we could use to monitor ammonia level within our housing. There's also the CO2 level, which should be just about 0.25% maximum. So, and there are meters that would enable you to be able to monitor this in your housing. And one of the suggestions that I have been making to some of our farmers is that we don't think that you're just spending money when you purchase these equipment. What you're actually doing is being able to monitor and improve your management system. As a matter of fact, some of the those sophisticated housing system with the proper monitoring that these farmers use also would monitor and track these onto your computer so that you are able to react to different negative condition rapidly that would minimize damage to your flock. We may also look at the outside temperature and relative humidity, your wind speed and wind direction also. I know that there's also various monitoring systems that will allow us to monitor our outside temperature that are available for farmers and so on. Now, just when one of the critical aspects is when we look at high environmental temperature on our pullet and what are some of the impacts. One is that you may have reduced growth due to high temperature. You may have feathering problem. You can end up with a flock uniformity problem. And you, of course, critically is feed utilization, where you have poor feed conversion. Pullets will tend to eat less under these conditions, so you have to be able to monitor your environment in such a way to improve that, so you have good pullet weight at lay and so on. During this period, pullet will also drink more water and eat less feed. Now, some recommendation when you dealing with your pullet under your heat stress condition is you never place underweight pullet in the laying house, because they will always remain small and have no body reserve to sustain optimal egg production. So, for example, not much calcium store and so on, not enough fat that could maintain the energy need for fat when there's a small deficient and drop between what they eat and what they need in terms of the requirement. You need to increase energy level of the diet by, ideally in some instances, you only way to increase the energy level in our diet is by incorporating fat in the diet. And of course, limit the use of fibrous ingredient in high fiber ingredient in the diet if possible. Of course, this will be part of the purview of your feed miller and your nutritionist at the feed miller. And I smile. Now, critically, we may have to look at issues like reducing crude protein component, but in these instances, we have to look at increasing our amino acid level. And the two critical amino acids that we look at is methionine and lysine to improve this. You increase your mineral, so your vitamin premix in accord with the anticipated change in feed intake. Maintain daily intake of calcium at least somewhere around 3.5 grams and available phosphorus at around 400 milligrams. And of course, your nutritionist will make these adjustments to meet these needs. One of the issues that we sometimes look at using under our heat stress condition is the use of supplemental vitamin C. Generally, we look at about 150 grams per ton when heat stress occurs, or you may be able to put your vitamin C in your water for your birds. Of course, you would again remove this from your diet during your normal condition, and similar to in your water. In these instances, they may need to increase the number of feedings per day and try to feed at cooler times of the day. Sorry. During your hot weather condition or heat stress condition, you again want to keep drinking water as cool as possible. Now, I've been on farms, and one of the things I've seen is that the farmer would use a galvanized pipe that is running from his waterer, which may be at a slightly distance from his pen, and he have galvanized pipe on the surface thing, and of course, galvanized pipe will transfer that that heat, and so the water going to the pen will be warm. You may also ensure, if you are in an area that are close to the sea or some distance away, and I know this salt water intrusion into thing is one of the issue with climate change that's taking place. And I know some areas close to the coast in Jamaica, and the sugar farmers have an issue because they are getting some salt in inclusion, so that you need to analyze the sodium content of the water to calculate salt contribution from your water, when you make these adjustments into amount of salt in your diet and so on. Now, in some instances, under wet, hot weather condition, I know you may not use mash, but you may look to use a crumble feed if this is available. Now, where your shell quality and reducing your cracked eggs is an issue and important in hot weather, you need to consider the incorporation of sodium bicarbonate right? But at this time, you also must be monitoring your sodium, your total sodium intake. Just to give you an idea of temperature and feed consumption, you'll see as your temperature go up, what your feed consumption is reduced. So there's an inverse relationship there. Now, again, there are some general recommendations that are made for hot climate in terms of, you see a nutrient coming down on this side, and it varies that at the different stages. So you have a starter, a grower, one, a grower, two, you have a pre-lay diet thing, and you'll see the various energy level recommended. Of course, in the tropics, we may wish to go to higher, slightly higher energy density. Now, some of the issues why we record and keep data. And I know this has been a little peeving issue with a lot of our farmers in the region. And I think our poultry farmers are much keen on keeping records. Our ruminant farmers this tend to be an issue of proper record keeping and keeping data. So you need to be monitoring growth performance, and you compare to your breeder standard. Your feed and water intake and mortality record are very critical. And I know that especially for contract farmers, those companies give you a record keeping sheet that you could monitor and keep the performance of your farm. Feed, water intake, and mortality are very critical. Now, these data are critical so that you could actually compare different flocks that you are monitoring and managing or growing during the year, which will also help you to monitor the economics of your production from one flock to the next. And of course, on farm, you could compare the performance of different houses. And this, of course, you could also allow you to improve and help your management practices by generating data that you could actually utilize. So I thank you very much. We come to the end of this performance, which may have been a little bit over time, and I apologize for that.
All right, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we're going to ask that participants type their questions relating to this presentation within the chat. And then at the end of the second presentation, we'll dedicate 15 minutes maximum to the questions that have been asked. So you can proceed to your next presentation.
Okay, thanks.
You have approximately 45 minutes.
Oh, Lord. Oh.
Maximum 45.
No, slight issue. The other presentation have disappeared from my thing. I might have inadvertently closed it off. So I'll have to get it.
Okay.
You could ask a few questions, take a few questions in the meantime while you're searching.
Questions while we wait, so we can just
ask we could do that.
Your questions while we look for the second presentation.
Okay, will.
All right, let me just I guess get the ball rolling. Lalu, you didn't really talk about, well, you kind of intimated it, but you never really spoke much about it. Genetic development of these layer strains for the tropical countries. You know, I noticed that the brown layers were slightly less efficient compared to the white layers, and they're a little bit heavier. One could argue that therefore the white layers would perhaps be better suited for the Caribbean. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I would agree with that. But the one of the which was we researched is that I noticed that Novagen, they have produced a bird in Novagen brown, which seemed to be quite heat tolerant and so on, as they are saying. And I think that's the strain that you all are rearing, most people are rearing in Jamaica now, yes, right? Yeah. And you know, I got the opportunity to do some work with that when the Tobago House of Assembly brought in some Novagen brown on their farm, because they were looking at at least they probably were sold by the breeders that this is a better bird than most of the other brown birds that they were using. And so we were able to do a bit of work with that. But I agree with you that with a lower body weight and so on than these birds. But there have been work, of course, done in Israel, where they look at using some of those other genes like the naked neck genes and so on to look at some strains, but largely for broilers, you know. So there is a strain, and I trust that given this our climate change issue, we will see some more resilient strain from the breeders that would be of relevance to us.
All right, definitely.
But a question here though, who drives the process in terms of your investment? The birds that come are really from our breeders. So who makes a determination as to what breed we get? Do we rely on just the breeders, or are there other things we could do to get better birds that are better able to fit into our climatic conditions?
Well, unfortunately, we have no control really over these breeding companies, and they breed their birds based on certain demands that they may see out there for us to move into this area. So we really have no control. It's a matter of us choosing what might be relevant to us. And therein again lies the issue of maybe us not engaging in enough and proper research, because certainly somebody need, if we monitor these birds, to be able to do some research and see how relevant the strain is to our environment, that our farmer, when they adopt a strain, we know that it's relevant to our production conditions.
All right, Lalu, I wanted to touch a little on enzymes, particularly the xylanases and their ability to break down the fiber and the non-starch polysaccharides. Do you think that this is a useful tool in our diet?
The carbohydrates.
Yes, yes. Especially since, you know, some people have suggested that in the hotter times you reduce your fiber intake. What role do you think enzymes play in helping mitigating the impact of heat stress?
Well, we haven't done any research in relation to enzymes and heat stress, but we have done some work, not particular with layer, but with broilers. And one of the things that we saw is that they tend to improve our utilization of some of these feed like wheat middling and so on that we in the feed. And there are better extraction of calcium and phosphorus from those diets that we had actually reduced the level of calcium and phosphorus in the formulation. So with regard to your pullet and development, I think your enzyme would have a positive impact at this stage. One critical thing that we also saw, because as you know, your mineral supplementation is probably the third highest cost in your formulation of your feed. And what we saw actually by using the enzyme, there was a reduction in the cost of the feed. Now I have to bring up.
I can certainly attest to that. Okay, then. I noticed that you have the NRC, but what role do you think the breeder recommendations play for their own genetic strains?
Well, one of the things as what I'm saying is that in the past, a lot of those breeders had recommendation to their climatic condition largely. However, some of the recent manuals that I've seen, they have started to address the issue of hot weather management and feed recommendation for that. So there are some guidance, but we have to be very critical as we use those recommendations. I'm bringing this up, but give me a little problem finding the share now. Share.
Can anyone assist there? Click on share.
So Lolly, have you not challenging that presentation?
Yeah, he can't find share. He can't find the share button.
It's not coming up on my computer. I've been having some little issue with my computer since.
All right. Do you want to share that presentation for you to just follow? That will work?
PS option.
Share it, Donald. Go ahead, and then I'm sure he'll follow.
Normally, sometimes I have to call my technical assistant, which is my daughter, and I'm not seeing her around right now. Samara?
So Donald will share it from his screen.
Okay, fine.
Oh,
right.
Donald, you want to go ahead and share it? Right, Donald, go ahead and share it.
I'm getting some help. I was getting issue with the share.
All right. Oh.
No, I get you it. Yeah. And I normally would think down here and it come up and it does. And I don't normally think, but I'm not seeing it.
A question is coming out. Can we, Tanika? I want to look at the message in the meantime.
I'm trying to get the share, but
I'm looking at it. All right. So somebody's asking
coming up.
try with our natural birds.
No, somebody trying to do.
I'm guessing production. You're talking about production of eggs, egg layers.
What name coming up right now?
I don't know. The question is in regards to what, whether it's in regards to heat
Greetings.
or production.
Greetings, Ras Peter. In regards to the production of birds that will match with the environment, we're asking if anyone ever try any experiment and developing our natural birds for that purpose, our natural chickens that we call common fall.
You hear the question, Tanika?
I heard the question. I think
if Lalo could answer, I don't know.
Address that.
Well, I could tell you that we at the university have never tried to look at these things. I could in terms of my literature research in our archives, the only work that was done in that area in the very early was in the days of ICTA, where they have done work on the Rhode Island Red and some of those things at that time. But we have not engaged in any of that kind of research in recent time. What some farmers have been doing who are producing what you might call yard fowl eggs is that they actually would import some of these birds. Like I know one farmer was importing some of those other birds that that we call yard fowl that he would use to produce his eggs. So I guess the answer to that would be no.
Thank you very much. Is it a possibility that any college like Case or any other college could do a little side experiment on that to see? Because we are talking about climate change, right?
I'm sure, yes. If Dr. Deslan is on, I'm not sure. He will best speak to regarding Case. Dr. Tanika, I don't know. A question I think is relevant.
I agree, it's a relevant question.
Right.
I think it's something that we need to look into. Genetic research, improving breeds, it's a very expensive endeavor. It requires very secured locations to not only have the grandparent flock, but the great-grandparent flock. So you start your genetic selection from that standpoint, the great-grandparent flock, and then you work and you select animals accordingly. It's a time-consuming endeavor. And if we have people who are committed to it, I think it's definitely something that we should look into. I know from my experience, I did my master's degree with layers, and it was a tremendous commitment of time and resources. So if we have students and lecturers willing to undertake it, and then of course farmers who are willing to provide feedback on the performance of these animals, then it's certainly something that we can look into. I know some years ago, perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, Hypro had brought in some layers that were slightly different from the Novagen Browns. They're a little bit hardier, closer to our backyard flocks, and they had handed out to some farmers, you know, both female and male birds. And some of the farmers, unfortunately, did not save the eggs, the fertile eggs. They sold them all. So rather than having a third genetic variety more suited for climate change, you know, we saw the numbers dwindling down. So it certainly means that we need to embark on an education campaign too, once we've identified these backyard animals capable of withstanding heat stress, to ensure that we save the eggs, we collect the data, and we can continually improve upon the genetics that's out there.
Okay.
I think the recommendation that we should look at and fine tune through UFO, and hence this webinar today. I'm speaking here as president of UFO now. So thanks for that question and the input, Dr. Tanika. Back over to you, Tanika.
Dr. Are you seeing my screen now?
We're seeing your screen, so we're
Okay,
ready.
my technician came and set me up. Okay, but on that, just one comment here. Maybe if could be a conduit to help with some of these areas of research that are needed, because certainly as a non-governmental organization, maybe one could be able to look at being able to access funds from outside that would enable you to be able to run some of these researches. And since you would be dealing with farmers, then there would be some facilities for on-farm research that could be done. And certainly we have the technical capacity within the region to be able to conduct these things, and in Jamaica. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead.
Yes, go ahead and start the timer. We're running a little bit behind time.
Yes, I realize that. We look
Right.
at the impact of temperature, humidity index on egg production of a layer strain and the implication for climate change. Now, this study was done, of course, through the university with the what we call the Tobago House of Assembly. And it's so happened that we had a student in our program who worked at that farm, and so we were able to get access to the birds and generate the data. Now, one thing that is an issue when we look at food production is that the global population is rising. United Nations population growth expect us to reach something like 9.6 to 10 billion people by 2050. When you look at the Caribbean data, the Caribbean will represent 0.6% of this increase. Now, one of the big issues, even becoming a much greater issue today, is when we consider what has happened with COVID, is our demand in terms of our food import bill is over $4 billion US dollars. I know that in Trinidad, our food import bill is somewhere closer to $6 billion. And we're talking about US dollars. And we produce probably 122 million dozen eggs per year. And most of the countries in CARICOM are close to 100% self-sufficiency, except around Christmas when we bake so much cake. So egg production is a major part of our agricultural sector in CARICOM, enhancing the food and protein security of the region from the poultry sector. Indeed, the poultry sector is a very critical sector in CARICOM because of the broiler production, which of course meet almost 100% of our need in most countries. Now, when we look at climate change, the studies from the climate change group in Jamaica, what their data are saying is that the Caribbean are moving to be much warmer. So in response to climate change, we are projecting to become much warmer in the Caribbean. Now, what this is saying, based on studies done by the university, is that the layer industry will be seriously impacted by heat stress, as during this period, the birds are going to be moved out of their comfort zone. So, so that the industry, as a mitigating factor, we need to start exploring the use of more robust strain, as Dr. Denny had earlier mentioned, that may show heat tolerance and good adaptability. One of the recent strains in the market that seem to have shown some good promise is the Novagen Brown, and of course it is a major strain used in material. And now this study was done in Tobago, and these are some of the protocols. Now, we in terms of monitoring, we did monitor temperature, humidity, and well bulb temperature in these houses. The birds in the houses were weighed in batches of 10 from each laying house on a weekly basis, and where we monitored body weight. Number of eggs produced per day, egg weight, the number of cracked eggs were recorded daily during the 23 weeks of the experimental period. Unfortunately, we could not have monitored the birds up until 72 weeks, for the mere fact that there was a time frame constraint for the student who conducted this work to be able to analyze and make a presentation for the requirement of the degree. Some factors we look at which were calculated were hen day production, number of egg laid in one day, over the number of hens alive in that thing as a percentage, and that gives us our hen day production. We look at egg mass, which is the aggregate egg weight times the percent hen day production over 100. The THI was calculated using the equation of Zolovich and this is in 1990, and this is the equation which take dry bulb and wet bulb into consideration. So the temperature humidity index, and then of course statistical analysis. We use descriptive statistic using Minitab 18 for Windows. We did regression analysis using the econometric software Gretel, and we used some calculus techniques using the software MapleSoft. Now, if we during the experimental period, we monitor those the microclimate of the houses. 4 actual houses were used, and you will see the mean temperature all above the as I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the all were above 30 degrees on standard. Of course, the minimum temperature varied from 28.72 to 30.89 temperature, and the maximum were over 33 degrees Celsius. The relative humidity were of course ranging again from you know, between the 60s to the 80s in these houses. So these were the environmental condition in these houses. When we look at the actual production over the trial period for the layer in these houses, we look at end day production, and you will see these are the actual production data, right? And then, of course, we did a trend line analysis that gave us this smooth kind of curve for these things. And of course, our equation, the R squared value were over 90. So that was a very good fit. But of course, we look at comparing the percent ND production of the Novagen versus our performance at Hook Farm. And you will see the Novagen is in blue, and you will see the performance, very nice thing. And under our condition, this showed you all the performance of these birds, our thing in these conditions. Now, we look at the temperature humidity index, the rectal temperature, and the layer performance in each one of these houses. So you have the housing on your top, your standard error of the mean, and your probability. Now, the THI you could see within those houses gave you a significant differences between those. And you see your letter that show you which houses had significant differences, right? The rectal temperature, of course, some of these rectal temperature, the A and B, they show they just reach just about to reach significant difference for some of these rectal temperature, but by and large, you could say that there was no real difference between the rectal temperature. We look at the number of eggs per week. Again, within that, there was significant difference within houses, between houses, sorry. And then when we look at the percent ND production, we saw a similar results. And when we look at our egg weight, if you look at these egg weights and you look at some of those egg weights earlier, when we look at the results from the breeder company, you will see that these egg weights are also falling within those range of those commercial layer. Again, you will see those differences. Well, in our study on the looking at the effect of THI on egg production, you will see the where we use our regression analysis to be able and this is an outline of the model that we use, and our log likelihood function value. And I have to say at this point that I have to give thanks and kudos to Mr. Palmer, who have been very instrumental in assisting me with some of these analysis. Now, when we look at the equation of egg production versus THI, and we are looking at dozen eggs, what you will notice as you move from 27 to 28 THI, you will see onwards that as THI increase, that there's a decline in egg production. So the effect of increasing THI on egg production from the bird is a decline. Now, so that from our calculation, we found the theoretical maximum quantity of egg produced, which was, let's call it 478 dozen eggs at the temperature humidity of 27 degrees. So for this bird strain, under our local condition, eggs production will start to fall when the temperature within the house is 27 degrees and over. Now we look at the some in terms of the monetary loss and so on from these birds' house, and the selling price of egg in Trinidad right now at the time was $20 per dozen. Because of current situation with COVID and so on, I think the last price I heard, egg price has gone up to something like $27 or $28 per dozen. So we could see that with COVID within the region, and I think that this has affected the price of eggs. And of course, the revenue would be the price of the egg by the quantity of eggs produced, we look at. And if you want to look at the value of heat stress for chickens in particular, you will see that between the level of less than 27 THI, that really there's no stress, which basically corroborate what we saw in the data. And as we move from 28 to 29, we start to see increase in heat stress. And over 30, you see very severe heat stress, which from the graph, you would see that it's impacted heavily on egg production. Now, when we look at change in egg production, to the change in THI from 27 to 32 THI, you see, you notice a decrease in egg production when we look at it per dozen eggs, and the decrease with THIs we move from 27 to 32. So you see some of the low the production, and overall total level of production drop, right, by, you know, per dozen. So the drop in egg production per dozen as we move from THI 28, 29, and you see by time you get to 32 degrees Celsius, we are looking at about 75 dozen eggs that drop at that level, so that you could understand that that would have significant impact on the farmer's revenue. And in terms of drop in revenue, you could see here a drop that you would have. And which was quite, you know, I was a little bit taken aback when I look at the revenue drop of about 48,000 TT dollars when I compare it to that when we were looking at the drop that took place on that Rada farm in St. Thomas, where she lost over 48,000 Jamaican dollars in a 3-month period. So you could see this economic loss as it worked out to over 3,000, almost $4,000 to the farmer. Now, when we look at the study done on, this study was done in 2018 thereabouts by myself and collaboration with the climate change group, where we look at what will happen in the future with regards to climate change. As you know, there have been the argument that we need to have the temperature being adjusted or being maintained at 1.5, and the slogan is 1.5 to stay alive as the target. Of course, recent information that I've seen indicated that 1.5 will not be the point at which we stop. But at 1.5, there are going to be significant impact on our livestock industry, as you will see, you know, and then you see here where we'll have issues where we'll be low, because the optimum level of impact we look at 30 degrees, and you see here production level for layer gonna be below that this 30 degrees, and compared to the broilers and ruminants and pig, that only part of the part of the year they will be under severe kind of stress at 1.5. So thank you very much. I hope I saved some time.
You certainly did, Lalu, you certainly did. All right, so really interesting information. It's staggering to know how much money was actually lost by the farmers, and of course,
exactly
right. Unless you take and record data, then you don't know that you're making a loss. Should have continued along the same path and not make any adjustments. So thank you very much for really bringing that to our attention. We now open up the floor for some questions. I see here that, well, Donald had answered Paul Lyons' question. All right, so let's see. Can you explain why you had different numbers of birds in each test? And then Donald said it was dependent on the size of the house.
Yeah, it was dependent on the size of the house.
Okay.
And remember, sometimes when you're doing these on-farm trials, you can't look for the ideal situation because, you know, the farmer have his economic agenda.
Correct. But the important thing is that the stocking density stayed the same.
Yeah, we recorded that.
Okay, all right. So Paula, I hope that answers your question. So you can, so the results statistically significant, allowing you to draw your conclusions. I believe you said that, you indicated that the results that you saw had a very high R-square value.
Yes.
Okay, so that's very high correlations right there. Do we have any more questions? Do you have pictures of the hosts itself, that the hoses that were used in this experiment?
Yes, in the student project, but I didn't put them into the presentation. I guess I should have.
Okay.
Just a question, follow up on Paul's question, right? So as Mr. Lalo explained, Paul, that, you know, farmers have different outlays, so we have different bird size. I think one house had a total of 500, next one was 700, and I think the other one has up to 1,000 birds, right? But it's very important too, because you have different size. So what we could actually do is to look at what is the economy of scale or size to see if larger houses have a greater impact on the production as compared to smaller houses. You could have some scale up effect, right? That is something that we might look at one day, Mr. Lalo, if we have the time, right?
Yeah. Well, if you want to collaborate, I have all the time at home. But one of the things to add to that, Donald, sometimes you may have smaller number in the houses, but depending on the size and the stocking density, that could be an issue, because remember, the birds themselves generate heat, which could also have impact on the temperature in the house and the THI.
A question for me is, by virtue of climatic changes and this impact on the stress level for birds, hence a lower productivity or lower output. Do you see any implications for food security as a result of this in the long term?
Yes, in the future, if we do not look to make proper steps in alleviating this production issue, we will have issues in food security in terms of the supply to our consumer and our population. However, there are technologies, some of them not very expensive, that can be used. The issue of using fans, there are some very inexpensive mister type fans that could be used in some of these home-sided houses that would help to cool down the environment, that could be used. So we have to be rigorously be looking at these areas. And one of the things I find within the region is that our producers and so on sometimes do not look to rely on our intelligentsia to help solve some of these problems.
I agree with you. The misters are certainly one area that we could look at. Another area too that I've found is just the simple act of burying the water lines underground. The impact of the direct impact of the sun will not affect it because the ground temperature stays relatively stable below room temperature. So you find that elsewhere in the region, Latin America, for example, this is something that they practice. And where the water hoses come out of the ground, they use something as simple as those, the insulating foam that you'd use for cars. You can go to any auto store, purchase them, make a slit down one side and cover the water hoses. That will go a far way in actually ensuring that the temperature that the birds are drinking is ideal for layer production. As Dr. Harris will say, he's on the line, birds don't like to drink tea. So
agreed.
Right, so if the water is hot, there's a direct correlation between water consumption and feeding. So I endorse what Dr. Harris always says. Painting the drums white, putting a shade over it. If you have the money, insulating the water drums, that's something else that can be done. Really simple, actionable items that's not very expensive. I always believe, and this is something we spoke about, Cicero, appropriate technology for the Caribbean.
Of course.
Yeah, some people want the highfalutin solutions, but a really simple solution is the ideal solution.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Denny, on that. As you talk, I was remembering when I first went to the university field station and I started renovating our poultry houses, because the first batch of birds I grew in those pens had a significantly high mortality rate. Why? Because these houses were were from a European Union donation, and they sent the plans to build these tropical pens. And both ends, the east and the west ends, were completely blocked up. So I had to redesign, I had to break down all those walls. And similar thing, bury the water line in the ground and so on. And painted all those things white. And one of the things I did, the roof was galvanized, was I fill bags of bagasse and place on the roof and then wet them down to be able to make proper adjustment to the birds in the pen. And the following growth, and that we were shocked in that the bird, most of those birds were over 3 kilograms by the end of the 6 weeks.
All right. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, because we kind of pressed for time, we want to move on to our final speaker.
I have one question. It's a sharing.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. How about planting trees in the farms where the chickens are? Is the trees or something that is drought resistant? Would that give any assistance of help?
Well, to that question, I know that at the university, there was a common practice of planting salmon trees. And it so happened that a couple of the poultry houses and the pig pens were sort of shaded by these salmon tree, which of course would help because of the microclimate created by those salmon trees.
Food for thought.
All right. Excellent question, Sharon. All right, so we're going to move on to our final presenter, Mr. Donald Palmer, General Secretary for UAFO, but more than that, a brilliant agricultural economist. He'll be discussing the best ways, the best operating conditions for layer production. By way of introduction, Mr. Palmer is a College of Agriculture trained agriculturalist who hails from the parish of St. Anne. He attended University of West Indies, Mona campus, where he pursued a Bachelor of Science degree in economics with a minor in statistics. He later read for his Master of Science degree in agricultural economics, where he specialized in agricultural production economics. The results of his master's project, an estimation of the efficient size of sugarcane enterprise for farmers in Trinidad, was presented at the 24th West Indies Agricultural Conference in Suriname. This research was later published in the Journal of Caribbean Agroeconomic Society. Mr. Palmer's professional career in agriculture began when he was employed as a lecturer at Brownstone Community College in St. Anne, where he lectured in mathematics, statistics, economics to students pursuing Associate of Science degree in business studies and Bachelor of Science degree in business administration. He then returned to Trinidad, where he continued to upgrade his skill set in statistical, mathematical, and econometrics methods. And in 2014, he was awarded a one-year visiting researcher in economics position at the Department of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph in Canada. Today, he will demonstrate the use of mathematics, statistics, and econometrics in the modeling of the quantity of eggs produced by the Novia Gen red strain birds in Tobago. So this is a follow-up, I guess a direct follow-up to the presentation by Mr. Lalu. Really promises to be a very informative presentation. Over to you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer?
You have to unmute. You have to unmute, Donald. Donald, you have to unmute.
Okay, sorry about that. First, you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I say thanks again, Dr. Denny, for that presentation. I mean, introduction, and also for all persons who stayed online for this part of the presentation, and to Mr. Lalo, who has been my mentor, who would have drawn me from economics into livestock economics, right? So as the topic is that, let's go back a little bit here. We want to look at estimating the base operating condition for layer production, right? The structure of the presentation will be, I will be looking at an introduction, general objective specific, bring up some theoretical construct, then bring in the estimation of an egg production function, results and discussion and some of main points. and we open up for question and answer. As you realize that this will be most like an economic-based type of presentation. So let's start it. And this will follow from where Mr. Lalos ends, where we looked at the THI that maximizes egg production, right? So I'll follow from that. In this presentation, he looked at a simple quadratic equation. I'll be looking at a 4-variable quadratic Q-form quadratic equation, but it's not technical. I'll try to be as best as possible, speak in layman terms. Okay, so we're saying that eggs are a resource of protein, and the quantity of egg produced by a layer bird is dependent on a number of factors. And Mr. Lalo went in depth in the first presentation, which I'm very happy. So I don't have to go in explain most of these things, like the strain of the birds, the stocking density, the quantity of feed consumed, and the microclimate of the house for the birds. So the general objective of this presentation will be to investigate the effects of environmental and physiological factors on egg production and over Jane Brown stray of layers in Trinidad and Tobago. And the specific objective will be to estimate the egg production function and then to determine the best operating conditions for layer birds in light of age of the birds, the stocking density, the temperature humidity index, and the quantity of feed consumed, which is intake. And then we're going to discuss the result from this best operating condition. So bringing all the pieces together, right? So Mr. Lalo brought you through the whole idea of understanding the feeding and management of egg-type pullets to the point of layer. So that was his first presentation. Then he went on to look at the impact of climate change on egg production, and he represented with an understanding of the impact of heat stress on layer on performance of layers. And the key issue was that measuring the impact of heat stress through the temperature humidity index on the quantity of eggs produced. So in terms of our theoretical construct, right? Here you will be presented with theoretical construct to estimate the best operating condition for their production, right? And here I'm going to use the concept of production function approach. When I say production function, I remember by this back in college, we did farm business management, and one of the aspects was to talk about production function and graphical representation of data and so on. So the production function is that the quantity of egg produced might be viewed as a production process. Production may be defined as the process of converting input into output using technology. So in this, what you're saying is that we talk about the production, we talk about the process by which we use to feed the birds. The bird would now convert the feed into eggs and that kind of stuff, so right? So that's a process. And if you use technology, and economists usually define technology as stock of available techniques or state of knowledge, consideration being inputs and are given physical output. So the production function here is defined as a relation between quantities of input that an entrepreneur employs and the quantity of output that he produces. So output in this case here will be eggs, right? And your input will be your feed, stocking density, and temperature humidity index, and the age of the bird in their laying cycle. We're going to say that the quantity of eggs produced in this study is assumed to be a function of quantity of feed consumed by the birds, temperature humidity index, stocking density of the birds, and the age of the birds. So eggs is defined as a function, feed, temperature index, stocking density, and the age. So we continue to look at our production function approach. So here we are saying that quantity of feed consumed by the birds, temperature humidity index, and stocking density of birds are under the direct control of the poultry farmer, right? So what we're saying is that the poultry farmer can manipulate these, right? However, the age of the bird is outside the control of the poultry farmer. Poultry farmer has no control of the age of the bird. Once you're at 4 weeks, you're at 4 weeks, and 5 weeks, and 6 weeks. You cannot go and revert back from 5 weeks back to 4 weeks. So that's outside of his control. So here, there are several measures we can have from a production function. You have the average productivity and your marginal productivity. But for this piece of analysis, one that is most important to us is our marginal productivity, right? I reckon the marginal productivity of a variable X or input X is a change in output which is associated with a small change in utilization of Xi. So if you want to think about our layer production, like and the marginal productivity of feed, right, would be what would be the change in your egg production when you just change the quantity of feed that you're giving to your bird by a small amount. So if you're feeding them 10 grams of feed, produce 1 dozen egg, what would happen if you move it to 11 grams? Would you produce 13 eggs or 14 eggs? So that's the marginal productivity. But in terms of a mathematical approach, usually define it to be a partial derivative of the function with respect to xi, right? And let us stop here. Because in economics, right, when you recall, like Mr. Lalo was alluding to, like it's the thing with the birds, right? You could record your data and present it in a table. How much feed you give the birds, how much eggs you get, right? Or you could actually draw a graph to see, just as Mr. Lalo was explaining, with you have the THI on the x-axis and number of eggs on the y-axis. So it's a graphical approach, right? Or you could also use a mathematical equation to say that, I mean, go back to CXC maths now. If it's a simple linear equation as y is equal to intercept plus the slope times x, right? So y is equal to mx plus c. And that function, if there's a particular property, we're stepping up a little bit more into economics. If it's differentiable, then you could apply calculus to get this m marginal productivity of xi. This is one variable, so this is a partial derivative function. Why am I bringing this hard concept here? Because this is a concept we're going to use to get a set of equation to solve it to get our operating cost, operating condition. So let's continue. So now, as I was saying now, that in economics, you could represent your data using tables, graph, or function. So this is a function, right? So y is equal to some b naught, which is an intercept. These are some terms, interaction terms, and these are some square terms, right? So we're saying that y, this will be number of eggs that are collected. Bi would have been the coefficient that you're going to get from your regression theory estimates, and this is where statistics comes. And you could say the first variable is the feed consumed, second would be temperature humidity index, third would be the age of the birds, the length cycle, and the fourth variable could be a stocking density. Let's continue. So this is the empirical modeling, because from this, we want to, put some numbers here. Okay, so that is it. So we get down to the result and this discussion, and Mr. Lalo would have presented some of these before, right? So let's look at the number of eggs produced. So the average on average over the 23 weeks period, you have 234 dozen eggs. Average lowest level was about 7 dozens, and the highest would have been like 500 dozen. So you have a range of 493 here. Your feed consumed will be like an average with 913 grams. Same thing here, the minimum feed was 575, the maximum of 1,409. Your temperature humidity index on average have been 29.77. There was some time when it was low, 26.6, and a high of 32.53, 5.93 in the range. Well, the weeks of the birds that you're going to start measuring at week 1, you go to week 4, 20. So this 22 doesn't really have much significant for us, right? What is more significant to us is the stocking density. When on the average, you have a stocking density of 1.52 square feet. So one bird occupies approximately 1.2 square feet of space. At some point in time, there was like 0.866 when they were very highly dense, and then it goes on to 3.2 here. Okay, so let's get back now. So we look at our estimate for egg function. So remember that I had presented this before, right? We have a B naught. Okay, we didn't have a beta naught here because we're starting from 0. So we drop that beta naught and we do looking at the function in the medium, in the long run impact, right? So beta naught was drop from function. So we just look at the linear function. So this will be the linear part. We have your feed, your THI, your age, your stocking density. Here that will be the interaction between your feed, THI, your feed and the age, stocking density, and feed, and that's here. So you just do your interaction terms here. And here now would have been your square terms, right? Our equation will be estimated using Gretel. We had an R square of 0.9346, and I adjusted R square of 0.9237, right? So what the adjusted R square says that we need to take into consideration all of these variables, right? Degrees of freedom, 92.37% of the variation in the quantity of egg collected were explained by feed, THI, age, stocking density, their interaction, and their square terms, right? Okay, so here now, we get into marginal product, and I've introduced the concept of marginal product before, right? And I said this was a very important equation because we want to be able to solve this equation to get our best operating condition, right? So for a maximum function from the CXC mass, right, it's an inverted U, which means that the top of the U is flat. So the gradient is not changing. You remember the days back in CXC maths when you're asked to compute the gradient of a curve along the line, right? And at the top, at the hill, it's there. You're not increasing. And if it's a minimum value curve at the bottom, the value is not decreasing, right? So we need to solve this equation, right? And if you look carefully, you will see that there's a constant term. These are the constant terms. And these are the variables, the THI, the age, the stocking density, and the feed, right? And they're equal to 0. So this 0 here means that the change in your eggs to your change in feed is equal to 0. The derivative is equal to 0. So there is no increase here, right? And the same thing here. So in order to solve this, what we'll do, we'll take this constant and bring it across here. So you'll have all of these and all of these. Then you will align all of these variables underneath each other. So the first variable is THI. You take this THI, put it here, this THI here, and this THI here. And the second one is age. You take, so this will be age, take this age, put it here, and this here, put it here. The last one will be your stocking density. Your stocking density will be here, stocking density. And you will take the stocking density from here and put it here. Let them equal to 0. And then we will have a system of equation. This is very interesting. How do we solve a system of equation? There are 4 equations in 4 variables. It's a 4x4 matrix, right? Well, when we were in Mono, they taught this thing about row reduction. So we'll have to convert all this is a whole set of matrix thing, and this would take you quite a bit of time. I mean, this will take you quite a bit of time, and this is what your lecture would give you if they really want to enjoy your weekend. But with the advance of mathematics and statistics, software, I use a software called Matrix Laboratory, which is a MATLAB, right? So I converted all of this into a matrix equation. So this part here would all be the coefficient on this variable here. So this will be the matrix A, which is a 4x4 matrix. And then now the variables would be a column matrix, a 1x4 matrix. All this will be that. And use a technique and just one click of it and it will solve it, right? Okay. So after solving this equation, then I got these results, right? So solving our equation yield the following result. So feed is equal to 988 grams per day. THI is equal to 27.301. Age is equal to 21 point that. Stocking is 1.75, right? So I want to explain the result. So the result indicates that the quantity of eggs are optimized when the birds consume 988 grams, is 2.8 pounds of feed, right? I need to recheck if it was day or week that the student had, right? But this was the value that they had. And that was that maximizing. The house had a temperature limit index of 27.3, as was reported in the previous presentation. The birds were 22 weeks in their laying cycle. So therefore the birds started to lay at 18 weeks, then the birds will be maximizing their egg production at 40 weeks, because 18 plus 22 is 40. And the birds had a stocking density of 1.75. And in the literature, in most of the literature, right, they're saying that the stocking density will be 1.5 square feet per bird, right? Let's continue. Okay, so in terms of policy implication, right? So you could change the quantity of egg produced by changing the quantity of feed intake to birds on that period of time. You could also adjust the stocking density of the birds depending on the scale of operation. You could also adjust the temperature humidity index of the bird houses. And Mr. Lowe was talking about, you could do a mist system or you could heat it up or something like that. And you could pay attention to the above 3 conditions when the birds reaches approximately 22 weeks in their laying cycle. Because The age of the insect which is outside of the control of the farmer. So what you want to know is that when the bird approximately like 38 weeks, you make sure these conditions are actually operating in the bird houses, right? And maybe like 42 weeks, so it could take 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after to get that optimal condition, right? So these 4 conditions would hold under this particular experiment that will maximize the quantity of egg being produced, right? Different data, Mr. Lalo alluded to the fact that it could go to 72 weeks. 72 weeks would give you a different, different reading, but these are what is key. But what can be taken away from it? That the quantity of feed, right, would remain constant. The stocking density will also be the same, and the temperature humidity index. But what we require to is to get different data set for different laying cycles. So we had, this was 23 weeks, and Mr. Lalo alluded to the fact that the student had to report it because they wanted to write their, some of the project, so they could be awarded their degree. If you could get, another laying cycle that maybe about 52 weeks, and one that is like 72 weeks, then we could pull all the data together without more variance, and we could come maybe with what we consider to be an industry type of operating condition, right? So let's continue. Let's continue. So here again, I just say that the birds consume this quantity of feed per week. The house at temperature of 27.3. The birds are 22 weeks in a laying cycle, and the birds are stocking density of 1.7 square feet of space. So what have we demonstrated here? We have demonstrated that the quantity of feed to birds, we have demonstrated that the quantity of eggs produced is determined by the quantity of feed fed to the birds on a daily basis, the stocking density of the birds, the temperature humidity index of the birds, and also the age of the birds in their laying cycle. And here ends my presentation. Thanks for listening. And you have some future further contacts. If you need to contact me, if you need to continue this discussion, or if you have data that you'd like to analyze to see what, what will be your best operating condition on your farm, I want also as UEFA to assist you. You could email me here. This is my direct UEFA email. This is coming straight to me. Or if you want to speak to the president and the members of the, members committee and other persons, you could email them here too. And we all will see your concern. Again, if you want to maybe send me a direct message, this is my WhatsApp number here. You could see my WhatsApp. I wouldn't say call me because I'm actually based outside of Jamaica. So calling might be a bit expensive, but you could also WhatsApp me. But these are my contacts. And thanks again for your listening. And I know we'll take question and answers.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant presentation. The final statement where you give your contact information is a very good segue into something that I had wanted to know, because the information that you presented is so fascinating. I was wondering, how do we translate this to commercial application? Do farmers present their data to you for modeling? And I think with your last slide, you've elucidated on that question. You certainly are willing to look at our data, because it would be nice to see how this information would translate to here in Jamaica, because it was, of course, Tobago. And we want to make sure that each of the findings really relates to the farmers in the specific regions. There's differences in water quality, that type of thing. So we're open to question. I have one question, Mr. Palmer. How do you reconcile the differences between what you stated as industry recommended stocking density and the ones that you found to be optimal in this research experiment?
Okay, so industry, so you go right back to the question what Paul Lenz was asking, right? For industry, right, is based off your research design. When you'd have wanted certain things, you could set some parameters, right? So this was a farm, there will be many variations, but for industry, and also if you collect a set of data, right? This was on one farm. So obviously this farm might have some inherent weaknesses in the experimental design. But for industry, maybe collecting maybe like Right, yeah, 13 parishes in Jamaica, 60 constituencies. So you could collect maybe 4 farms for data points from each of these 60 constituencies. So you have maybe 240 data points. And then the variation would just approximate to an average. So that's it. But this is just one, this is a sample of what the industry in Tobago would be, right? So we would expect some variation.
All right, yes. And of course, one of the variables that we'd have to account for too is the differences in diets. We'd have to block for that because, you know, there are some minor differences in the diets of different feed companies and also the time of the year. I know I certainly make adjustments for the summer period, so we would have to block for that also. I have a question here from Michael Williamson. He's asking, how significant are the slight adjustments in the THI from the ideal on egg production? How can a typical farmer mitigate in order to maximize on the economic efficiency?
Okay, so Mr. Williams asked that question, right? Very good question, Mr. Williams. But if he's still there, I would like him to ask a question so we go by step, right? So if you could open the mic and let Mr. Williams ask a question, then we could discuss it, and that would be also for the benefit of the farmer. So go ahead, Michael, with the first question.
All right, Mr. Williamson, you can go ahead and unmute.
I have. Good morning, everybody. I think I was asking, since the presentation specifically from Lalu to Mr. Farmer has to do mostly about the effect of climate change. And the THI is one of those indicators that would indicate to us the impact of the climate change on the productivity of laborers. So we want to know, because we said the ideal THI should be 27.3.
Right.
And for the typical farmer, how I want you to tell us how significant impact on his productivity and in particular, and also his bottom line, if a THI is slightly elevated. So we use elevated above the ideal, and what are the measures that he should take to mitigate?
Okay, great question, Mr. Williams, all right? And I'll bring in Mr. Lalo here to assist me because the question is actually a cross-cutting one between Mr. Lalo's presentation and my presentation, right? So if you look at what Mr. Lalo in that THI thing, right, it maximizes at 27, right? So it means that when you're at 26, you're not getting enough. So you could go a little bit higher to reach that 486, right? And below that now, when you reach to 28, you start to see a dropping off of your THI, right? So I think it started to drop off pretty sharp. Mr. Lalo, can you just tell Mr. Williams, right, from your presentation, when you move from 27 to 28 and 28 to 29, what were the drop in the actual egg, those of eggs that we had, right?
Yeah, I would have to go back to my presentation to pull up those figures.
Precisely. But what issue is that, because you know that, I mean, it degraded. Well, I'm speaking because Mr. Williams said.
Well, what I could say is that once you start to move from 27, you get to 28, 29, you're seeing a very a drastic drop. But you have severe heat stress, you see a very, very sharp fall in egg production. So that once you start to move beyond that 27, you could expect the farmer would be losing money too.
All right. I want both of you to speak on the mitigation. What the typical farmer, and when I speak about the typical farmer, I'm speaking specifically now of the small and medium-sized farmers. what are the measures that you would recommend if you had missed it, you would recommend for him to make that adjustment that his THI remains in that critical band that you recommend?
Well, one critical aspect of all of that I would recommend is that if he could insulate his roof. Now, I'll give you an experience I had in Jamaica. When I was in Jamaica and we were visiting these farmers, I saw a very interesting thing in St. Mary where a lady, she used cardboard boxes to insulate a roof.
Oh, good.
Right? And now this is an oldish lady. And when I took the temperature under that roof was, the temperature in there was much lower than temperatures are taken in St. Thomas, where there were no insulation in a roof. So she was able to use that cardboard to be able to do some mitigation so that insulation of the roof would do well to do that. Now, I had issue with some of those things in Trinidad, and one of the things that I did was, which might be expensive for some farmers, I painted the roof of my poultry houses white, and that made a difference to the temperature in the house. Right? So there are some
I don't want to take up so much time, but I have a question. Do we have a prototype of an ideal in the age of climate change? And do we have a prototype of the typical broiler, egg house that is not significantly more expensive than the typical one that we have now, that would improve or maintain productivity amidst climate change and don't impact on the farmer bottom line significantly?
Well, offhand, I would say no. I remember there was one stage when I was at the university that I had approached some of the fellows in engineering of being able to look if we could design or develop an ideal open-sided house for broiler production. But again, that didn't get off the ground, didn't get proper response. But ideally, maybe it is possible for a number of people or the industry to look at being able to design a proper open-sided house for thing, because two critical aspects that one would have to look at is, say, the height inside the building, the roof to the ground, being able to use some insulation and so on, and the orientation of the house.
Good. All right,
and these are some critical things that we'll have to look at, but it is possible.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much.
So, Mr. Williams, your question was adequately answered, sir.
Thank you much.
Right, so just to continue your conversation, right? So I have the data here. So you were asked about the deviation, right? So less than 26 or so, you wouldn't have been reaching the maximum, which is 476, right? At a age of 27, the egg production will be about like 474. 28 is drops to 469, right? And at 30, it's like 412, right? So obviously seeing that as you increase the THI, you're dropping egg production. So what you want to do is do the reverse now, right? So if this is too hot, you want to cool it down, so to speak. So that's when you bring in your mist blower and stuff like that. Because remember that the way computed, the THI was 0.4 times, I think, the wet temperature plus 0.6 times the dry temperature, right? So I know this is a linear combination of two variables. So that is it. So that's what you would do here. But you also raise an important point, right, about significant change. Well, if I knew that you were going to ask this question, I would have carried my result, which I use a translog model, right? Where we estimate using, we could actually get elasticity, because you're asking a question that is hinge on production elasticities, right? That's another thing we could look at, right?
You and I will talk.
Yes, you and I will talk, and I know you want to impart the knowledge to the student too. So, okay, Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much for that. I want to remind everyone that there is a poll for everyone to answer. We really appreciate your feedback. It's critical to help the planning of future webinars by UEFA. So please go ahead and answer the question presented in the polling. All right, let me look and see if we have any more questions.
Okay, there are no more questions. Then I could talk in the capacity of GenSec, and I know that my president would sanction it. So if farmers have data that they would like us to analyze and to give them some kind of a solution, you could contact us at UEFA, we could look at it and we could tell you exactly what we need to do. And as what Dr. Denny alluded to, in terms of, we want to transfer this information from Trinidad to Jamaica and do it on a more research adherent conditions, so to speak. So we set up our experimental design. Well, she alluded to the fact that a completely randomized block design, when you could block in terms of the time of the year, maybe the location in Jamaica, and also the type of feed and stuff like that. And then from your blocking and your design, that will be the experimental design, you collect your data, and that, you know, feed us into our estimation. And once your, the biometrics is right, that the biometry is right, that is the experimental design is right, then we know that we'll have, data which have equal replicates, so we could control for variation and stuff like that. And then we would apply our statistic, which is regression theory, then train our calculus, test for the convexity of the function, and that sort of thing. So if farmers would like that kind of analysis, then you are open, you just contact us at UEFA. We'll try to see how best we could assist you in getting out the best operating condition for your farm or farm in your particular location.
I endorse that 100%. The scientists in me would love to see that data. I know that Russ Peter, he alluded to homegrown data here in Jamaica, and the only way we can move the needle in terms of productivity is if we start relying on data generated here within Jamaica and CARICOM rather than what is presented to us by the breed companies. So, Mr. Palmer, I thoroughly endorse that. I want to thank you for offering up your services. It is certainly not cheap, and I know it's time consuming, and definitely the offer is from a place of love for the agricultural sector. So if we have no further questions.
Denny, just one comment. I endorse that, and I think what the organization could do, we could probably get together and outline the key parameters that we need to look at for the layer production and develop a recording sheet that could be done so that we could be able to collect that data to be able to analyze, to say exactly what is happening.
I agree. If we can provide, if the technocrats can provide some direction to our farmers, something that is quite simple, not a lot of data to be collected, that would be definitely well needed. Perhaps the use of technology. I don't know how many of our farmers would be willing to download an Android or iOS app.
Yeah.
Just information. That would certainly be something that we can look into. I know RADA recently launched an app for collecting of data. It might be something that we want to explore, expanding the functionality of that app that RADA has developed. So these are all things I think that we would need to look at, and this is where UEFA will be coming in, and the Raspita, of course, is talking about other sectors. I agree with you, the other sectors do need the same type of intervention, but right now we're focusing on the layer industry. All right, then. Do we have any more comments? If not, I would like to sincerely thank Mr. Lalu and Mr. Park. I would certainly call it a matter session or a real educational session. Mr. Palmer, you brought us back to the college where our professors were trying to impart upon us the importance of mathematics and how it can apply to real world application. And we certainly appreciate, you connecting the dots with how you can use mathematical modeling to determining the best method of layer production in these times of climate change. Mr. Lalu, I want to thank you for mentoring your students and bringing to the fore this very important topic. It's certainly relevant and timely. And even though you're retired, I know that you'll continue to contribute to the knowledge base that is agriculture here in the Caribbean. And we'll certainly look forward to hearing more from you and inviting you again to just drop additional pearls of wisdom on us. To the executive of UEFA, I want to sincerely thank you for providing a non-aligned source of information. I know sometimes, if information is obtained by any of the tech reps representing a private company, it's viewed with a little bit of skepticism. So we really appreciate the fact that you were able to organize a seminar that had two very independent presenters showing information that's relevant to the Caribbean. And I'm sure that the members of the Egg Farmers Association really appreciate it, as well as the general public. And I know that this will be available for YouTube. So I encourage everyone that attended today, don't keep the information to yourself. Go ahead, share the love, share the knowledge to everyone else. And let's see if we can move the needle forward. Eggs are the cheapest source of animal-based protein here in the Caribbean, but our consumption is woefully inadequate, well behind developed countries. And I think in this time of food insecurity, this is the way we can definitely reduce malnutrition and undernutrition here in the Caribbean. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny, for moderating this webinar today. Also, and thank the presenters, Lalo and Palmer. And I'm indeed very happy that we were able to have the participants join. As you said, the poll was open, it may be closed now, but we ask you to respond to the poll questions because we seek to gather information so as to improve for the others. As well as we want to ensure that those of you who are in egg production will have learned something from today and will have been able to check to see if you have learned what you have learned, so we can help to guide us as we plan for others. And surely once the protocols are properly worked out, we'll definitely be able to do some analysis with the data collected, and we ask and we urge our farmers to participate and be willing to share the information so we can better analyze it. We look forward to having other webinars. And I should let you know that the idea behind this webinar today was it should have been a twofold webinar, but we thought that the day would have been too long spent if we were to apply the other area, which had to do with water and the best practice for water during climate change. That is being worked out, and you'll be notified in time as to when the date is set for it. Thank you very much again for your participation, and I wish for you a very good afternoon. Thank you, Lalo. I'm happy that you are retired and you are still prepared to assist us here in Jamaica and elsewhere. Thank you all. Thanks all for coming. Thank you. So we have come to the end of yet another day's presentation. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, President. Thanks, Dr. Denny, for moderating. Thanks, Mr. Lalo, for coming and sharing with us the material. Thanks
All
again
right.
to everyone. And
Thank you.
also to Mr. Fitzgerald Reid, who actually assisted us in getting this webinar up and running.
In fact, you want to say it is his committee, Donald, that has guided this webinar today from the Climate and Research Committee. So Fitzgerald, thank you. You and your committee. Thank you all.